Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to today's tutorial. Today I'll be talking about my Typescript project that I have created in about 2 or 3 hours. And what we have here is simply a list of people invited to my party. So we have certain celebrities. We also have some CSS effects. We can, of course, show a person adding form and add some new people. With some optional fields. I'm not really sure, maybe this could do. And of course write some notes here on them. And if we add a person, well, that is not actually a valid image URL. We could actually get famous like actor like Leonardo DiCaprio, and we can get a picture of that actor and paste it into our application. Let's say this picture. And if we paste it right here, so as you can see here, this picture got loaded in, so we can add people. We can also edit their data and remove them from this list. So for example, I can remove this person and I can edit this person right here and edit their credentials here. So this will be Leonardo, for example, and submit changes. And as you can see, it does react to everything. If we have a lot of text, you see I am using this overflow ellipsis, and I can expand the text. Maybe here we have a bit more text, so you can see and close and expand. So in this project, let's first go to application, app.tsx, the most important file in your application. The rendering process of React starts from here. So what you can see here is I actually am using TSX and not TS. So the main difference between TypeScript and JavaScript React is that you need to basically, in files where you are using JSX or TSX here, you need to have the file name as TSX basically, and not just JS like in JavaScript. So that's one thing to sort of note. It took me a while to see where the error was when I was using app.ts and I was trying to use JSX elements here. Well, the problem was that the file wasn't named properly. So now that we're here, I can basically show you around here. So here we have something like an interface, which I'll touch on in a moment. And here is the function. Here we have the return statement. So all of these components that I'll be using in this application will be function components. I'm also using state here. So one thing that you've probably already noticed is that while defining this function, I have already defined this thing here, which is JSX element. What this little thing here means is that this app function will be returning a JSX element. And well, is it true? Yes, it is. This is our return statement, and in it we have our JSX. So sometimes in TypeScript you don't have to define what the function will be returning. Sometimes it implicitly is already known and TypeScript can guess, and it is not necessary to define that. However, I did it here. I don't think TypeScript will return an error here. Let me just save that file. Yeah, it's still working fine. But just be sort of guarded, because most of the time you will have to define certain types. So now, for example, we have state here. So this state basically contains people. So this information about these people is saved in the app component in this state variable. And I'm using a normal use state hook. But the difference here is that right here after this use state phrase and before the brackets of the default value in use state, I'm actually saying what the type of data in this state is going to be in this variable. So, for example, on this in this state variable, I'm declaring that I will be having booleans in my state variable. Now, in this place, for example, I'm just passing in false here, right? So false is, of course, a boolean. So again, this would not be needed because TypeScript would still know. If I hover over this, you can see that this adding state value is a boolean. So this is not needed, and how we call this is an implicit type declaration. We don't need, it's implicitly known what this type is going to be. However, I'll just leave it here. It's not game breaking if we leave it here, and it makes everything maybe more simple if we always define the type. Now, in this case, for example, we have the example people here, and sometimes the things that you put into the default value for the state, they can change. So sometimes it is important to actually declare what it's going to be. The best bet for you would be to see if there is an error, because TypeScript, of course, is designed to catch error types, type errors. So if it doesn't know what kind of what type of the variable it's going to assign to this variable, then you will need to define it. So now that we have the use state sort of explained, I'll do a bit more explaining later. We can actually explain what this thing is, because it's actually very important. So this is an interface, and it's called iState, and I am also exporting it. And this is not a default export, since there's only one default export allowed in a TS or JS module, which is this app component, but we are exporting it nevertheless, and I'll touch upon this in just a moment. But at first, interface is a very important thing in TypeScript, since it allows you to define your own types, basically. You could sort of take it like an object from JavaScript that has a certain simply values that are hard-coded, and basically if you don't pass a value into an object, if you pass in, for example, name and age, but leave out the URL, it's going to complain to you. So that's why we define basically this interface. So what you can see here is that I define basically that I want to have in this iState interface, I'm going to have people, and the type of that people is going to be, it's going to have name of type string, age of type number, URL type string, and note of type string. And just to clarify, this question mark here means that it's optional. So if it's left out, it's not a problem. So also one thing to bear in mind here, this basically means that it is going to be an array of such objects. That's people here. That's why when we are using it here in this use state, we are saying I want from this interface, and I could actually have maybe some more, let's say people, let's say books, for example, and another type like name, author, etc. So I'm just taking out the people, so this, out of this iState, and I say, so I want this state to contain, this people variable to contain this, basically this type of data. So an array of objects that have these keys in them. So if we actually hover over this people here thing variable, then you'll see that it is indeed an array of objects that match this type. And here you can see it's either string, or this is a single pipe here, or undefined. That's in TypeScript, we use single pipes to say or when it comes to typing. So this is what this question mark allowed us to have here. So it may all seem a bit weird right now, but I'll also explain other components, and you'll see more of this in action. So basically what I do here, I have a few functions. As you can see, this function, for example, it receives an ID argument, and we actually have to give the type of this ID argument. It's going to be a number, but of course TypeScript doesn't know that. And if we use this function handle delete somewhere and we pass in a string, TypeScript won't let that happen, and it will complain to us that actually this ID should be of type number. So it is making extra sure that you don't pass incorrect data anywhere, and that the system does not break, which is really safe and actually very useful. This is not really needed since there is no return keyword here, but of course I could also type it here that this function returns void, which means that it doesn't return anything, and well, there is no return statement here, so it makes sense. Now if I returned let's say a 2, now you'd see that there is a problem because this number is not assignable to type void, which essentially means that I said that this function is going to return void, type void here, and here I'm returning 2, so type number. Now if I do this, this is in fact returning nothing, so yeah, I can just delete that. And so I don't have to write that here, but you know, it's making extra safe here. I did it here, for example, so I can do it here. It doesn't really matter. It depends on how your project is set up and how is it managed in your company. I'm just trying to show everything you can do here. So these are the two functions, and inside of the app, well, we have the main header, of course, and the list component. We also have some buttons and some logic, and we have a person form. So it is dependent on if we're actually adding a person. So this is in regards to this. This button opens up. Can I open up? Yeah, it opens up this form. So you can see that it's something many people also do in JavaScript. It's really not that different. It's basically the same. Is adding true? If adding is true, then render this component. If not, then render nothing, render null. So yeah, let's make it render null. So yeah, that's nothing special here. So basically, maybe I should also touch upon how this button is set up. So it's also something that is basically the same thing that you do in JavaScript. So I believe this button, yeah, it regulates if you are adding or not adding a new person. So just on-click set adding, and you don't need, as you see here, you don't need to define any types. So if you have, so how do I know that I don't have to add any types here? Why don't I have to say that this adding, this previous state, which in our case adding is a boolean, why don't I have to say that, hey, this is a boolean, right? You see that it doesn't even work here, of course, because this is just a short expression here. Maybe if I do this and type boolean, yeah, now it works. So why don't I have to do this? Why is it not necessary? Well, because React already, or TypeScript already gets the type from this setAdding function. This setAdding function returns the previous state, and React knows that this setAdding function here, it is defined to use Boolean. So it knows that, but maybe you're not sure if actually you should type it or not. Well, if you're not sure, just hover over this parameter and see here it's adding Boolean. So if you type in Boolean here, it's not going to change anything. You just need to ensure that everything is correctly typed. Usually, if there are no errors, it's usually correctly typed, but it doesn't hurt to check again, check twice. So, all right, now we have covered more or less the app component. We are still going to return to it because I have been passing a lot of props here, and props are actually very important in TypeScript, and you need to make sure that these props are properly typed here. So let me actually go to the list tsx component. That's right. As you can see here, I'm rendering this list component, and I'm passing in 3 variables as props. Actually, there are some, there's some data and some functions to pass. So in this list component, I'm importing some stuff that's not really essential. What is essential, though, is that I am creating another interface, and then only then am I actually making a component, defining a const list as a React component. Now, what is important here is that this interface, props, you're going to see it a lot. If you are passing props to a component in React, then you need to define an interface, or actually, basically you need to define an interface, and inside of that interface you need to define all of the props that you're going to be receiving. So, for example, here I'm defining people, remove from list, right here, and set people. These 3 variables, props, that this component receives, and I'm defining them. So you see the people prop is going to be of type. We are in the interface, we are only defining types, right? So this might seem complex at first, but it actually makes a lot of sense. So you look at this interface, and we are saying, okay, so in this interface props, we have the key people, which is going to be of type iStatePeople. So if we hover over the people here, you can actually see that it's type. So it's going to be type of an object, an array of objects. This is the type. So the type is an array of objects in which every object has a name of string, age of number, etc. We could also define another variable, another prop. For example, let's say my prop number, or my prop num, shorter version, and it's going to be, of course, a type number. You see, so this is basically the same. I'm saying people of type iState of people. It's actually, I'm importing iState here. That's why I can use this iState, as I have exported it right here. You can see, so I can import it directly like that through this structuring sort of things here. So I can import it, and I can say that, hey, this people prop is going to be of type iStatePeople. Same thing here. I can define my prop number, another prop, which is going to be of type number. And if you have keen eyes, you probably will have noticed that as soon as I typed this new prop here, our application TSX, our app TSX, has an error message over here, and you can see that I don't even have to save this file. It already shows an error. So let's see where this error is. Well, of course, it is here in this list component. Why? Well, let's read it. Property myPropNum is missing in type. And a lot of gibberish here, set people, but required in type props. So yeah, it is essentially saying that, hey, you are missing a prop here. You see, we are sending in 3 props, and you have defined 4 props here. Prop people, prop this prop, and this prop. Well, it is a problem, and it is, again, checking for safety. If you have passed everything in everything that you should into your component. One thing that we can do is, as we did before in our iState interface, we can type here a what's it called, a question mark, and again, as you can see here, it immediately disappeared because it is not required. It can be undefined. Then you are telling React or Typescript, yes, you're telling it that you're fine if this prop is not passed because it is optional. Okay, let's delete that so that our code actually works. What I have defined here, for instance, this is a bit more complex. I just am saying that the prop removed from list is actually going to be a function which will be returning a void. And this function will be receiving an argument, which is going to be a number. So you always need to define what the function will be returning inside interfaces. That's how you basically define interfaces. Again, I'll say this, interfaces are for defining your own types. You're defining what types of data will be stored in the interface variables. You're saying, if I want to define a function inside of an interface, because let's say that it's like a class, basically. You can have class methods, right? You can have class variables. Well, an interface is a class of sorts. It doesn't have a constructor, but it's your own data type. So you're saying this interface, it will have its own function, and you're not really defining the function body here. You're just saying the type of the function will be that it's going to return a void, and it will get these and these arguments, which have to be of type number, type string, or type whatever. And this function can be, of course, defined somewhere else, but it will have to conform to the designs that you have outlaid here. For the last prop here, well, this is something tricky that I'll touch upon later. Basically, this, as you can see, as I said before, we have prop 1 of type number, right? So type number, yeah. So this is how we define things in interface. We have prop and the type. So here too, we have a prop and the type, and yes, this is a type. It is, of course, not a primitive type. This is a primitive type. This is a very complex type, or, well, more complex than the number anyway. But I still had to type it here. So you might think, oh gosh, well, I really have to type, write out all of these difficult types, like, what is it even? React.dispatch. And then react.setStateAction. I don't know anything about such things. I'm just a JavaScript React developer. So fear not, you will not have to learn anything new by heart. You will just have to copy this from a certain place. So basically, I'm saying this set people prop is going to be of type this. Now, where did I get this piece of code? Well, let's actually go to the place where the props are passed. So in our app.tsx, and why is there a problem? Oh, because I added this prop number. So here we are passing this set people here, and this is the thing that we are passing, that we want to pass into the list component. So we want the list component to be ready for this type of data. So we can basically hover over this, and as you can see, this is a const set people, which is of type React dispatch, React set state, and whatever. We are just copying it here, Control C, and we know that this is the type of the variable that we are going to pass as set people here to the prop. So when we are defining the types of the props, this is basically, we're saying this set people prop, it will be, I'm deleting this, and here it is, I'm pasting, it will be of this type. I didn't have to know about any sort of how React set state action is built. No, none of that. I just have to check what is the type of the prop that I'm passing in and define it here, where I define to the types of the props. So now down here, when you look at this component, you'll see that it is, well, again, as I can see, as I'm writing this is a function of type React, or sorry, actually, this is a constant list, which is of type React.fc, and here we are typing this props interface, and then this React.fc is equal to a function which receives this. So now you might actually think this is very complicated, right? Where does this go? Why is this React.fc a function or something else? Well, actually, yes, it is. FC stands for function component. It's even written here. So basically, you are defining a const, which is going to be of type React function component, and this function component will receive props in this way. So it will receive a data type. It's awaiting an interface that it can destructure right here. So why do I have, for example, in my app component, I just have a function app, right, which returns a JSX element. Well, the reason behind the fact that I'm not defining a type, the type of this function, is that I'm not receiving any props here. So I don't really need to use sort of a React function component things here, methods and sorts. I'm using use state methods, so I'm not receiving any props. But when I actually do receive props, it is imperative that I define this as a React function component. It just guarantees me that I can receive these props and destructure them here. Now, these are the props that I have set here, right? People, remove from list and set people. What this does, it is an object destructuring of, basically, it could be the same as props. If I typed props here, it wouldn't be a problem. I just need to type here everywhere props.people, right? So by simply writing destructuring an object here, I can just use these variables like that. I don't have to write props.people, props.remove from list anywhere. Of course, that's down to you really. If you want to know, to make sure that this variable that you're using comes from props or is from inside the component, you're free to write props inside of this function, as this function simply receives props. This is a normal functional component. It's really very similar to what you do in JavaScript. But the only thing is, if you want to receive the props, it needs to be of type React function component. And of course, you need to define the types of props. This is all about Typescript and making our code type safe. So more or less I have covered everything which is needed here. We are basically inside of that, using everything that I have already described here. For example, I am use state using this function, and in here I'm defining this use state will have an array of numbers, and the default value is an array. That's actually an important thing here, because if I didn't do that, let me just delete this. If I didn't do that, I see that Typescript that there are some problems, yeah, but not here. They are down there. So argument of type number is not assignable to parameter of type never. Yeah. So immediately when I deleted this typing here by use state, I get an error in my code, and that is because yeah, I'm actually checking here in this piece of code where the error has appeared. I'm checking for this more variable, and I'm checking if it includes I. And I know that I is of type number, right? It shows me that it is of type number. So the problem is that React doesn't really know what this more variable is going to be. What is the type? It says that it is of type never and an array of types never. So if we want to actually check if this more includes a number, this more would have to contain numbers, right? So it is essential that we simply tell Typescript that this more variable is going to have to store an array of numbers. So you see, in some cases, and actually, of course, not a number, but it's going to store an array of numbers. So you see, sometimes it is implicitly known what type of data our use state is going to store. But sometimes, like here, I could put anything in this array, basically. So this can cause type problems. This is not type safe. That's why it is, in this case, imperative that I define the type. So this can be a bit tricky, but I will post this code onto my GitHub. You can create a clone of this application. You can try some different things for yourself and try to see how this works. You can get your head around it pretty quickly, I'd say. So what else is there to say? Well, all of this is actually very similar to normal JavaScript code. It's nothing really important. You know, or when you get to TypeScript, you think, my code is going to be so different. Look at all this weird gibberish that I'm going to have to add. But essentially, it's not like that. It's really making sure that everything is type safe, defining the types, and actually, by the way, not only you are type safe when you use React with TypeScript, you also have very nice IntelliSense. So for example, if I define an interface somewhere and I want to create an object of type, let's say of type props here, I will get all of these variables sort of by IntelliSense. So I get to choose what am I know sort of what I need to fill in again, because I can always hover and see what is required of me, essentially. I have another component that I'd actually like to cover here, and I think it is in this list component. It's rendered by the list component. Yes, the component is user data and list elements. Let me actually see user data. Okay, let's go to the user data component. So yeah, as you can see here, we have a person. So no, I want to go to person form, sorry. That is another component that I'm using. Of course, it's about having a form here. So maybe that's also essential, because there are some things in forms that you do differently from JavaScript. So basically, what I have here is some functions to handle input. So let's talk about them. In my JSX, basically I define an input the same way I would if I were defining it in JavaScript. OnChange here gets this function modify person values. Now when I'm defining this function right here, I need to actually define it. So const modify person values, nothing different here, equals. And now I actually need to define the types of data that this function is going to be using. That's the one thing that you always need to do in TypeScript. Always you need to define types of the data that the function, upon defining the function, that the function is going to receive. That's actually making sure that the function is not misused and that always the appropriate data is transferred to the function. So here, again, it might look very confusing to you. There's a lot of gibberish here, but it's really not that different to, for example, this const myfunc equals a function that just console logs. Let's say that, yeah, console logs something. Now, what will it console log? Let's say that we have an argument here, num, and it's going to be of type number. Remember, we need to always define the types of arguments, and I want that number to be logged. This is a very simple function, and the premise is exactly the same here. I always need to define the types. So here we are. I'm defining that this function will get a parameter that I name E, of course, for event. As here, I defined that it is going to get a parameter that's called num, and it's going to be of type number. And here, this E argument is going to be of type React change event HTML input element, or React change event, or of HTML text area element. So I'm using the pipe here to sort of make a distinction between these two, but yeah, this is going to be the type of this event. Now, how did I get this? How did I get this basically? Well, it's very obvious. I hovered. That's what you need to do in TypeScript. You're not sure what is going to be the type of data that your function is programmed to receive? Well, just check what is the type of the value that you want to pass in. So here I will check this on change. Maybe here I will get something. And here, well, we do get this. We have a React change event handler HTML input element. So I know that there's a lot more text that I'm actually reading here, but you need to sort of learn how to read this. So here you have some information that this is a JSX attribute, all right, and it is a React input HTML something dot on change. Basically, you are waiting for you're searching for this. So this is optional, of course, but here you're always waiting in TypeScript to see this colon here, because after the colons we always define the types. Here you can see number colon num colon number, which means that after this you always get the type. So if you're hovering, always look for the colon, and here we have it. So here this is the type that we are going to have to paste into this. And as you can see, we have an input. We have an input and we have a text area, and both have this function called onChange. That's why I am including input element and text area element. Pretty solid, pretty easy. And here, for safety's sake, I also put this void, although I'm sure this is not actually needed. You see, it is not. So yeah, basically nothing else is important here. Here I had this age variable on new person, which is of type person. As you can see, I'm hovering, and here we are, person. So I had to pass this eTarget value, which is of type string. You can see here it's type string. I had to parse it to int, because if I didn't do this, it would simply throw an error. So here again, if I'm I'm actually creating an interface that I know that will be used somewhere else, where I can just export it to. It doesn't really change anything, and I can import it somewhere else. For example, I think I'm importing it in the list here. Yeah, you can see I'm importing person like that from person form. And if I'm doing any logic that actually requires sort of this this person interface, I can just take it from this component. It doesn't really matter. So basically, I think that's all of it. I'm not going to cover all the CSS here or how I did this expand thing with the ellipses because this tutorial is not about it. But of course, if you're interested, you can always post a comment down here. Feel free to run this app on your computer, fool around with React, check what you can do and can't do. It's really down to basically figuring this out for yourself, making a demo application, and just trying out your luck. So yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them, and see you in the next tutorial.